marching on.
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And we do thank you for joining us on Crosstalk here on VCY America. Ladies and gentlemen, daily we're receiving updates from the Department of Homeland Security listing the arrest of what they call the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens. Looking at last night's report, they highlighted arrests from this past weekend, including a 53-year-old criminal illegal alien from South Korea convicted of voluntary manslaughter. It's been sentenced to 11 years in prison. ICE also arrested a 41-year-old criminal illegal alien from Colombia. History of some 23 criminal arrests, 18 convictions. Fraud, forgery, shoplifting, DUI, obstruction of a law enforcement officer, possession of tools for commission of a crime, false ID, probation violation. There's also a criminal illegal alien from Mexico, convicted for felony stalking, domestic abuse, protection order violations. Another from the Dominican Republic, convicted for possession with intent to deliver and carrying a firearm during the commission of a drug trafficking crime that occurred in Pennsylvania. Yet another from Nicaragua, convicted for assault causing bodily harm. That happened in Austin, Texas. Another from Mexico, convicted for alien smuggling in Albany, New York. And yet another third-degree sexual exploitation of a minor, disseminating obscenity to a minor. That individual from Mexico. One from Laos, aggravated assault with a gun in Los Angeles. Yet another willful poisoning of a food of a person in California. On and on the list goes. These are crimes, ladies and gentlemen, that never should have happened on U.S. soil. Murders, thefts, rapes, assaults, driving drunk and taking lives, all happening due to the lax border enforcement directed by the previous administration. Meanwhile, there are governors and mayors who are digging in their heels and are adamant and standing up for criminal aliens who would rather sacrifice the safety and security of their residents than to allow the removal of those who entered illegally. Meanwhile, a federal judge is attempting to shut down Alligator Alcatraz. Why? Because of its alleged harm to the environment. Well, joining us today to comment on these and so many other issues regarding the latest immigration news, we welcome back Andrew Arthur. He does have an extensive background, but friends, I think it's important you hear that because he knows from whence he speaks. He's a resident fellow in law at policy for the Center for Immigration Studies. He did begin his legal career as a clerk to an administrative law at the U.S. Department of Justice, Executive Office for Immigration Review. Later in his career, he was promoted to the Immigration and Naturalization Service General Counsel's Office in D.C., first as an Associate General Counsel, then as Assistant General Counsel and Acting Chief of the INS National Security Law Division. In the General Counsel's office, he supervised attorneys handling cases involving espionage, terrorism, and certainly persecutors as well. He advised the Attorney General, among other matters pertaining to national security. In 2001, he left INS, became a counsel on the House Judiciary Committee, where he performed oversight of immigration issues. After 5 years there, appointed to the Immigration Bench, serving for 8 years as an immigration judge at the York Immigration Court in York, Pennsylvania. At the beginning of the 114th Congress, Judge Arthur left the bench, came back to Capitol Hill, served as staff director of the National Security Subcommittee at House Oversight and Government Reform before taking retirement from federal service in 2016, now working with the Center for Immigration Studies. And Judge Andrew Arthur with us today. Andrew, thank you so much for your service to this nation.
Oh, Jim, thank you for having me. And again, all that the foregoing proves is I have a tough time holding a job.
Yeah. Well, it's every day. To me, it's a literal jaw dropper receiving these updates from the Department of Homeland Security as to the arrests that are being made across the country. I mean, these are very, very horrendous crimes that never should have happened.
Yeah, and let me put all of the arrests that you've heard about, that you just, discussed, and that you will hear about in the next few months in the context. Every one of those aliens was known to ICE in this country before Donald Trump put his hand on the Bible a second time. Those were people who were known to the Biden administration, known to DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and the people who, the hardworking agents and officers who worked for them. But unfortunately, under policies that were implemented by the Biden administration and carried out by Secretary Mayorkas, the hands of ICE officers and other officers across the country were tied in going to pick those people up. Why in the world would we want to countenance the continued presence of child molesters, of gun offenders, of brutal thugs in this country? And yet that was the policy of the Biden administration. In fact, it was the policy of the Biden administration to such a degree that the president and his Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, his Attorney General, sued all the way to the Supreme Court twice, once in 2022 and once in 2023, to beat back state efforts to force them to take more criminal aliens into custody, to get them off of our streets. I don't know why there is such a passion in certain quarters in this country for criminals, but it's undeniable that there is, and it's definitely had a pernicious effect. And honestly, Jim, it's fallen hardest on the immigrant communities where those criminals primarily live and where they generally operate.
How so?
Because most criminal aliens in the United States live in immigrant communities. That is a story as old as the United States itself. When the English came here, they went to where other English were. When the Irish showed up and the Germans, they went to Irish and German communities. And that's as true today as it's ever been in our history. So when we see Tren de Aragua members, for example, from Venezuela come to the United States, they will go to those communities in this country where there are large Venezuelan populations. They'll live in those communities, and when they look for victims, when they get into fights, when they want someone to rob, when they, commit unspeakable violence, the primary victims of those offenses are the other people who live in those communities. And that's important to keep in mind when you talk about sanctuary policies. The whole point of sanctuary policies is that we value our immigrant communities so much that we're not going to turn the criminals in those communities over to the federal government. I mean, just to say it makes, just shows how ridiculous it is. And yet we have a largely incurious media in this country that never digs down to that next level. That's why when Donald Trump says, sanctuary policies do nothing but protect criminals, that's what he means.
Now, you served some 8 years on the bench. Was that hearing asylum claims?
I've heard a lot of asylum claims, hundreds of them. All told, I did somewhere between, depending on how you count it, 13,000 to 20,000 cases. And many of them involve, exactly the sorts of criminals that we're talking about. My jurisdiction, I sat in a small town called York, Pennsylvania, but my jurisdiction extended to two federal correctional institutions, FCI Moshannon and FCI Allenwood in Pennsylvania. I also had jurisdiction over the entire Pennsylvania state correctional system. So I got a lot of criminals, and those criminals ran the gamut from major league drug traffickers to, individuals who engaged in domestic violence and low-scale drug possession crimes. So, I really got to see the full universe of people. But a lot of those people, and many of the people that I saw who were brought to me from the border, made asylum claims. And, some of those asylum claims were good. And, we were able to protect individuals, particularly Christians who were subject to persecution in China and in Africa, as well as, a few other people through that process. But a lot of those claims, Jim, were simply claims made by people who tried to come in illegally or who did come in illegally, got caught, and who were, playing upon the humanitarian instincts of the American people as their last recourse.
Are we just totally overwhelming our judicial system? I mean, you have done some studies and look here even at, you just released a report today on some of the staggering numbers of asylum applications pending in our immigration courts. Help our listeners understand what kind of numbers we're talking.
Sure. I mean, when we talk about asylum claims, they're actually heard before two different adjudicators. People who are in removal proceedings have their claims heard by immigration judges, by people like me. People who overstay their visas or who manage to get into the country illegally can go to their local U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services asylum office, and they can make applications there. And let me just throw the numbers at you real quick. At present, there are nearly 2.4 million asylum applications pending before about 690 immigration judges. And then there are another 1.5 million asylum applications that are pending before about 1,400 asylum officers at USCIS. So put that together, you're pretty close to 4 million, 3.9 million plus people who are making asylum claims, and that's more asylum applications than there are residents of the state of Connecticut, which is our 29th largest state, to give you how many people have come here to take advantage of the humanitarian protections that this country offers.
With that kind of load, how long are we talking? I mean, we're talking many years before this could get through the courts.
Yeah, I mean, current trends, it could take more than a decade to actually work this out. But here's the good news. The good news is that because President Trump, CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott, former chief of the Border Patrol, and, of course, the indispensable border czar, Tom Homan, because that border is so secure right now, we're not getting hundreds of thousands of new cases dumped onto judges' dockets every month like we were seeing under the Biden administration. That flow is cut off, and so consequently, and, listen to what I'm going to say, and I'd ask your listeners to hone in on what I'm saying. For the first time in 17 years, thanks to the Trump administration, the backlog of pending cases, pending before immigration judges, declined in the last 2 quarters of 2025. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is an amazing thing that they've done. It's, I come from Maryland. We're a sailing state. And one thing any good sailor knows is that you don't start bailing the boat until you patch the side. Border security is patching the side of the boat, and now those immigration judges, those asylum officers can get through the process of sorting out the wheat from the weeds, figuring out the good asylum claims from the whole lot of bad ones that are out there, and start issuing some deportation orders for people who shouldn't be here.
And the numbers of encounters at the border, those are plunging big time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the numbers that we're seeing right now, and again, we have border numbers that go back to 1960. And those are just at the southwest border. We have border numbers that go back to 1924 at the borders writ large. And the monthly totals that we're seeing right now, fewer than 5,000 apprehensions, these are the lowest numbers that we've ever seen in our nation's history. So, I mean, Joe Biden used to say that he needed Congress to act before he could secure the border. But the one thing that Donald Trump has shown is you don't really need new laws, you just need will.
Yeah, you need will and need to enforce laws that exist. Andrew Arthur with us today, resident fellow in law and policy for the Center for Immigration Studies. Their website, CIS.org. They've got much wonderful information there. If you want to really be informed what's happening at the borders, check it out, CIS.org. We'll be back in 1 minute here on Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation researcher with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, where is the Garden of Eden today?
Chris, we don't know. The location of the Garden of Eden is forever lost. After Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, God placed an angel to guard the entrance so that no one could go there again. There is no such place on earth that's guarded by a fearsome angel. The Bible does tell us, however, that in the days of Noah, the world was totally restructured by that great flood. All landmarks of the previous world were destroyed. The earth was completely restructured by that flood, so we wouldn't expect to find the Garden of Eden. While the names of the rivers that are given in Genesis do correspond to modern-day river names, they don't actually correspond to any known rivers. Chris, let's go back to Genesis and think carefully about what it teaches there.
For more information, visit our website at icr.org. I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
We've got an immigration update today on Crosstalk. Andrew Arthur, our guest, resident fellow in law and policy for the Center for Immigration Studies, and talking about a number of current issues. One of the issues that happened, the tragedy just a week ago, August 18th, we have a criminal illegal alien who obtained a commercial driver's license here, driving an 18-wheeler and going down a highway in Florida, making an illegal U-turn on the highway, causing a crash, took the lives of 3. And Andrew, it's just astounding to me to see this long line of people lining up to saying, oh, this is just an accident, don't be so harsh. Some 2.5 million reportedly have signed a petition in support of the driver.
Yeah, no, well, let me just state at the outset that I didn't add my name to that list, but none of this is really that surprising. The individual, well, actually, some of it is very surprising, some of it's not. The driver in question is apparently from the Punjab region of India. He is a Sikh, and I was a trial attorney in San Francisco back in the mid-'90s, and it's pretty common to have Punjabis, to have Indian nationals who were the Sikh religion as truck drivers. It's just a very common profession amongst them. But most of the Sikh drivers that I was familiar with, back in the mid-'90s, were people who were here legally. We have a rich and vibrant Sikh community. Sikhs serve in our military and our police forces. And it's a good community. It's a community of good people. They share many American values. They fit very well into the United States. This individual isn't one of those people. He was apparently here unlawfully. At one point he'd been given work authorization. The work authorization was taken away, but somehow he managed to get a commercial driver's license. I think he actually had one in California and in Washington. But he was in Florida when he attempted to do a U-turn in the middle of a heavily traveled parkway in what I believe was, somewhat inclement weather, and that led to the deaths of 3 people. One of the issues in this case is that he may not speak English, and he may not be familiar with U.S. Street signs, which is kind of an important thing when you're driving a 53-foot long, trailer with a massive semi in the front of it. But in any event, after he was processed in Florida, he was released. He went back to California. One of my old bosses, Governor DeSantis, sent his folks out to California. They brought him back, and now he's sitting in jail in Florida, awaiting justice, awaiting his due process. But this speaks to a larger issue of so many individuals who are here unlawfully who, have melted into our society. One of the key takeaways of the September 11th Commission, if you remember the commission that was established on a bipartisan basis in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks, was that we needed to know who was in this country, that we had a series of checkpoints that those individuals would go through, that we would be able to identify people who shouldn't be here by people who had bad intents or people that sought to harm, our homeland and our communities. And one of the things that came out of that was the Real ID Act of 2005. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have their Real ID. If they take out the driver's license, look for the little star in the corner, it will show that they are, verified, that they are here lawfully, either because they're citizens or green card holders or have another lawful status. And the whole point of that was to keep people who were, who had access to airplanes and nuclear facilities and courts and, honestly, the tractor trailers away from the American community so that they couldn't harm them. Well, it took 20 years and various presidencies for the Trump administration to finally get around to making that real ID mandate, permanent. But unfortunately, it was too late for the 3 people who lost their lives on that Florida highway.
I'm seeing Sean Duffy now as Secretary of Transportation as just really making a strong initiative here to clamp down on states that are not, for violation of the English language rules as it relates to drivers and the issuing of driver's license and commercial drivers in particular. And we have seen some horrendous tragedies taking place, as well as a number of DUI convictions as well taking place, with loss of lives being taken by those who had entered the country illegally, got sauced up and out on the roadways.
Yeah, no, and as I mentioned before, when I was an immigration judge, I would have dockets. I would have dockets of 20 people either in the morning or the afternoon at what we would call a master calendar hearing. And there would be days when, 5 to 10 people on that docket would have been arrested somewhere in Pennsylvania because they had a DUI. And I saw people who had blood alcohol contents, 3 and 4 times the legal limit. There are different cultural norms, all around the world. And part of the assimilation process is teaching people that, drunken driving is not acceptable in the United States. If you have a few drinks, if that's the way that you're inclined, call an Uber, call a cab. Don't drive yourself because the risks are too high. And here's another statistic from Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. The average drunk driver drives drunk 90 times before they're caught.
My.
So when you hear about, all of these people, all of these instances involving drunk drivers, in the heartland of America, Nebraska, or Iowa, or Kansas, or, in California, New York, and Florida, or here in my home state, my current home state of North Carolina, those are people who, didn't have bad luck. Those are people who, more or less just ignored our laws and ignored the sanctity of human life and decided, for their own good that they were going to have a drink or 2 drinks or 10 drinks or a 30-pack, which I saw one time, and will go drive on the roads. That's a problem, and it's one that we need to address, not turn our eyes away from. And people, yet another incredible fact, drunk driving isn't a ground of deportability in this country. Spousal abuse is, and it should be. And they're, lying on your taxes is a ground of deportability. But a crime that can, enable you to, take the life of another person, that's not even a ground of deportability.
Wow.
Many Republican members of Congress have attempted to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act over the years to say, well, what if 3 DUIs would make you deportable? And that's too much for some people in Congress. And I think that's one of those things. Again, we're a 501c3. We don't promote legislation. But if you don't like the idea that drunk drivers, can continue to drive and not be deported, you may want to call your congressman.
August 7th, just looking this month alone, I saw August 7th, the illegal alien driving while intoxicated killed a person in Louisiana. August 8th, next day, illegal DUI hit and run took the life of a woman in Illinois. August 9th, it happened in Pennsylvania. August 15th, it happened in Wisconsin. August 18th in Florida. The 21st in the state of Maine. I could go on with this, but it gives us the picture of what is taking place there. And just maybe a side issue here, there's also the drugs issue, which we have had porous borders. But, here again, we have the Department of Homeland Security really clamping down. And just within the last hour, I received a press release as the Coast Guard just achieved its largest ever drug seizure in a sting operation, largest ever in its history. This was the offloading some 76,000 pounds of illegal drugs valued at $473 million. This is at Port Everglades, Florida, part of the Operation Pacific Viper. But, Andrew, 61,740 pounds of cocaine, 14,400 pounds of marijuana. The drug cartels and what's come across our borders has been just astounding.
Yeah, no, and, let me take that one step further. Drug seizures would have been a whole lot higher over the last 4 years if our Border Patrol agents hadn't spent so much time, rounding up people who wanted to get caught because they knew what they were going to get released, and transporting them and processing them and caring for them and feeding them and diapering their children. Those agents want to be out on the line. They want to stop the dope from coming in. They want the fentanyl to stop. And yet nothing was probably better for the business model of the Sinaloa cartel or the Gulf cartel or the CJNG or Los Zetas than the immigration policies of the Biden administration, because they overwhelmed our agents' ability to stop those drugs from coming in. I mentioned Rodney Scott before. He's now the commissioner of CBP. After he was fired as Border Patrol chief by Joe Biden, he wrote a letter to Congress. One of the things he explained was the drug cartels control illegal entries into the United States by migrants, because they know that if they flood the zone, they'll create what he called controllable gaps that they can use to run drugs into the United States. You want to know why there were 100,000 fentanyl overdose deaths in 2021? Well, that's because the agents weren't there to stop those drugs from coming in. And the same is true at our ports of entry. One of the Biden administration's, most questionable initiatives was allowing people to download the CBP One app at a rate of 1,400 people per day, and they could make an appointment at a port of entry to present their asylum claim. Well, those officers didn't accept any asylum claims. In fact, they said so on their website. But what that served to do was it served to pull CBP officers, the inspectors at our ports of entry, off of the line. They couldn't find the drugs because they were too busy talking to some guy who had downloaded an app and probably wasn't ever going to show up for immigration court anyway. So, the Biden administration's immigration policies had so many deleterious effects on our schools, on our hospitals, on our housing. But probably the keenest one, Jim, was on the overdoses. I've talked to a lot of the parents of kids who lost their lives to fentanyl. And one thing that they'll say is, these aren't overdoses. These are poisonings. These are murders. And the Trump administration is, treating those smugglers like what they are. They're murderers. They are putting the lives of Americans at risk.
They really are. Andrew Arthur with us today, Center for Immigration Studies. Let's talk about the poster child, it seems to be, of illegal immigration, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. What is going on with him? It's okay, we're deporting. He's back. He's in court. He's going to be deported again. No, we've got a judge stopping this. What's happening with him?
So right now he is sitting in ICE detention in Virginia, as I understand it. ICE wants to deport him to Uganda. Very briefly, he was granted a very limited protection called statutory withholding. It's not asylum. It's got a higher burden than asylum, and it has fewer benefits. But to grant him that protection, the judge had to first order him removed from the United States. So the judge ordered him removed and told ICE you can send him anywhere in the world except for El Salvador. And so, as you know, back in March, DHS ended up deporting him to the one country he couldn't go to, El Salvador. And so consequently, the president's opponents latched on to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, probably the most unlikely poster child that you can imagine, as the person whose rights they wanted to promote. They hammered the Trump administration mercilessly. A district court judge in Maryland hammered the Trump administration mercilessly because she demanded that the Trump administration engage in diplomacy with El Salvador to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia back to this country. And you may be asking, well, why did we need El Salvador's consent? Because as soon as he got to El Salvador, they put him in prison.
And we're going to pause right there. We're going to pick up with this story right after the break. Andrew Arthur with us today from the Center for Immigration Studies with an immigration update. We'll talk more about Mr. Garcia. We'll be talking about the sanctuary cities, what's going on with there, and the plan by one federal judge to shutter Alligator Alcatraz. Back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
The Watchtower Society claims to be God's only channel on earth.
Because Jehovah's Witnesses believe the Word of God is channeled to humanity through this elite committee alone, these men...
But is the Watchtower Society's translation of the Bible accurate and unbiased? Are its predictions for the future reliable? Are its followers content with their lives and leaders? Is there truth to what they teach? The Watchtower says yes to each of those questions. In the booklet, The Facts on Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll find well-documented answers and insights that reveal the error of their teachings. You'll learn what they believe about the Trinity, about Jesus, about salvation, about their mistranslation of the Scriptures, and about their many failed prophecies. The handy-sized booklet, The Facts on Jehovah's Witnesses. Available for a donation of $9 when you call 1-800-729-9829.
Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. There is so much happening right now as it relates to immigration, what's going on the borders, what's happening through all of these processes right now. So we're glad that you've tuned in today. And friends, yet we're scratching the surface. If you want to go in depth on this and many other topics, visit the website cis.org. Andrew, you've just got tons of writers and information that's available there to whoever just accesses the site.
Yeah, no, I mean, and, I tried to, keep all of our readers informed about what's going on, to explain things in very basic terms, because one of the issues that we have when we talk about these issues, Jim, is that I have nothing against reporters. I have a lot of reporters who are friends, but most of them really only know what they're told. They don't have any subject matter expertise in this. Mm-hmm. The center has an entire lineup of experts, people who have been doing this for decades, starting with our executive director, Mark Krikorian, who is truly the dean of, immigration and immigration enforcement in the United States. Mm-hmm. So, I'd strongly recommend your readers or your listeners become my readers and, come over, click on CIS.org. I generally try to have something up every day, and I jump around a lot. So I'm going to cover a lot of subjects. If you want to know about it, I've written about 3,500 blogs in 8 years, so you'll probably find it on there somewhere. CIS.org. So we're talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia and bringing us up to date. So they said you cannot send him to El Salvador, but that's what they did. So pick up from there if you would. So as soon as he was sent in error, as the government admits, to El Salvador, the Salvadoran government placed Mr. Abrego into what's called CICOT. That is their, anti-terrorism jail. Basically, it's where they house all of their gang members. El Salvador, for decades, has been racked with gang violence. And most asylum claims that I would hear from El Salvador had something to do with the gangs. Either the gangs wanted to recruit me, or they wanted to extort me, or, a gang member wanted me to be his girlfriend, or something like that. So, this has been a massive issue. It's been one of those things that the United States has asked El Salvador to deal with. And in 2023, President Nayib Bukele began a crackdown. He cracked down on not just MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha 13, but also on Barrio 18, or the 18th Street Gang, both of which operate in the United States, both of which operate in El Salvador. So when Mr. Abrego got to El Salvador, he was taken into custody by the Salvadoran authorities, who was put into CICOT, which is why when a district court judge in Maryland, Paula Zinnes, demanded that the U.S. government facilitate and effectuate his return to the United States, President Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio were sort of at a loss. They're like, he's a Salvadoran national. He's sitting in their jail. What do you want us to do? And so it took about 3 months, but eventually Mr. Abrego was brought back to the United States. But he didn't go back to Maryland. He went to Tennessee because in November of 2022, Abrego was arrested by the Tennessee Highway Patrol. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have seen the video. He was driving a car. He had 8 people in the car. None of them had luggage. He had more than $1,000 in his pocket. And he, told the officer that he was driving these folks from Texas to Maryland at the behest of his boss. Well, the government investigated this while Mr. Abrego was in El Salvador, and they determined that, they claim, and a grand jury accepted the claim, that he had, in fact, been engaged in smuggling of aliens between Texas and Maryland. So he was charged with that. He was detained. A magistrate judge in Tennessee eventually released him. And after he was released, with his own security provided by his own supporters, he traveled by road back to Maryland. And he was in Maryland for over the weekend, and he had an ICE call-in letter. He went into the ICE office in Baltimore, where I used to work, also on Monday, and he was taken into custody. It was at that point that his attorneys filed a habeas petition with Judge Zinnes, saying, oh, my God, here are a whole bunch of reasons why he can't be deported. Apparently, ICE wants to send him to Uganda. We have an agreement with the Uganda government, with the government in Kampala, to take back third country nationals like Mr. Abrego. He doesn't want to go to Uganda, though. He wants to go to Costa Rica, and respectfully, if I were him, I'd probably make that choice as well. But right now, that judge in Maryland has frozen indefinitely Mr. Abrego's release, and he's claiming that he is being unjustly treated because, he had the temerity to file a case to bring him back to the United States. But, this is no longer a case about a Salvadoran national named Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This is now more or less a case study in, whether you are for immigration enforcement or against it.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. That's what it's boiling down to. And with that being said, I'd like you to address, if you could, the obstruction that we see taking place. And I see it on a couple different levels. We see obstruction happening from federal judges who are issuing, injunctions or protective orders or say, no, you can't do this. But we also see obstruction taking place by sanctuary cities and counties as well. Deal with the judge issue first, if you would. I mean, we even have a federal judge trying to shut down Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah, so with respect to Alligator Alcatraz, that is on environmental grounds. And again, it's no surprise that opponents of immigration enforcement will use every law they can, and the environmental laws are a pretty popular one. The issue with that case is that Alligator Alcatraz sits in the Middle District of Florida, and that case was brought before what I'm assuming the filers of the petition thought would be a more friendly court in the Southern District of Florida. So we'll see how that plays out. But at the same time that we see, that judge trying to shut down Alligator Alcatraz, we see governors in Nebraska and Governor Mike Braun in Indiana that are attempting to open up brand new immigration detention facilities.
Speedway Slammer, Cornhusker Clink.
Yep, the Cornhusker Clink, Governor Pillen in Nebraska, and the Speedway Slammer, which I personally thought should have been called the Hoosier Hooscow, but Mike Braun wasn't asking my opinion, in Indiana. But I think we're going to see this a lot more from those, primarily Republican-led, Trump-friendly states around the country. One of the things that you'll hear, Jim, is complaints like we saw with Mr. Mahmoud Khalil, when he was taken into custody. He was taken into custody in New York City, briefly taken to New Jersey and then sent to Louisiana. And they're like, oh, you're trying to punish him by putting him in Louisiana. Well, one of the things that we've seen when you talk about obstruction is that states like Maryland and New Jersey and California have passed laws that limit the ability of ICE to detain aliens in those jurisdictions. And, I guess the thought is that if every state does this, that ICE won't be able to detain anybody, but of course that's not what the law says. But what's turned out has happened is that governors like Governor DeSantis and the governors of Indiana and Nebraska are more than willing to provide space to the government. And so those people who are arrested in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Baltimore or, Newark or New York City, they're all going to those states. They're going far away from their families, and they're going far away from their lawyers, not because ICE wants to keep them away from their families and their lawyers. They don't have a dog in that fight, but because they don't have the space to do it. And the sooner that sanctuary jurisdictions wake up to that fact, the happier everybody's going to be. But, it is part of that sanctuary movement. Mayors like Mayor Wu in Boston, Mayor Bass in Los Angeles, who have decided that criminal aliens are the hill that they are going to die on politically, that is, their winning issue. Gavin Newsom, may be the last person in this country who, will admit that he's actually running for president in 2028, but he's decided that the Trump immigration policies are the horse that he's going to ride to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And so these mayors, the mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago is another one, they're throwing up every possible obstruction they can to ICE enforcement. They vilify ICE agents. They talk about how these, folks are masked and, they don't identify themselves. Well, the law actually permits both of those things. And the reason that they're masked is because there's so much vitriol and hate directed toward them and, Jim, and this is the reprehensible part, at their families. ICE officers are getting, actual threats against their families. We know where your kid goes to school. We know where you live. Look over your shoulder. This fever has to break or something very bad is going to happen. And a lot of people, should be ashamed, but a lot of the people we're talking about don't have shame.
Yeah, and no shame at all. Friends, we're opening our phone lines today. Our phone number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Your questions or brief comments on the topic of immigration today. That's 800-733-9829. Andrew Arthur is with us today, resident fellow in law and policy for the Center for Immigration Studies, the website CIS.org. I would also just like to bring to our listeners' attention today another matter that you've brought up on CIS.org, and it's the attention to UACs, unaccompanied alien children. You indicate Congress must act. What is the problem?
So when we talk about 300,000 lost migrant children, when we talk about, New York Times exposés about how migrant children have been released from custody and are working in factories or on rooftops, kids. I mean, we're not talking about, adults. We're talking about kids. All of that comes back to a 2008 law, the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. Of course, Mr. Wilberforce was the great British emancipator. He was the man who, single-handedly almost ended slavery in the United Kingdom and that led to the abolitionist movement in the United States. He inspired Pastor Garrison and many other people in this country. And for some reason, they thought it was a good idea to put his name on a bill that does something very unusual. And let me describe it for your listeners. If a unaccompanied alien child, a kid without a parent or a guardian, shows up at the border, and that kid is from Mexico or Canada, then CBP, Border Patrol, can reunite that child with a family member back home. Assuming that the child hasn't been trafficked and isn't in danger, we simply send them home. But if you're a child from anywhere else in the rest of the world, we don't send you back to your family. We decide that the United States government should be your caretaker, and you are sent to the Office of Refugee Resettlement in the Department of Health and Human Services. And again, as I've said many times, don't ask me why the Office of Refugee Resettlement was given this responsibility. That actually dates back to the Homeland Security Act of 2002. But, and their job is to shelter those unaccompanied kids in one of its shelter system, and then in most cases to release them to a sponsor in the United States. Now, we think, well, it was the parent that paid the smuggler to bring the kid here, and they're going to get put with the parent. But that's not the way it's turned out. In fact, about two-thirds of those cases, those kids are sent to somebody who wasn't the parent, who, many of them are guardians, many of them are people those kids don't know. And as we saw the numbers increase, some bad things happen that we could talk about after the break.
Mm-hmm. Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Our number, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Recently from the Oval Office, President Trump announced and then signed an executive order where he wants to make it a year in jail for burning an American flag in the process of inciting a riot. Well, the courts have ruled on this, so we'll see where it goes. But I opened up the phone lines on my radio broadcast to see what Americans thought. I admitted up front, I am very conflicted. I do not like to see our flag burned, spit upon, or desecrated in any way. It bothers me deeply. But I also believe that we have to be careful when it comes to doing anything that abridges on First Amendment rights. Would it be a crime to burn the LGBTQ flag? Could you go to jail for that? Or the Quran? You see, the issue is we have to be careful, folks, as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, not to fall into a trap. Because you can say, well, we want to prosecute people that don't agree with the Holocaust. Wait a minute. Do you really want to do that? That's a double-edged sword. Let's be wise.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Andrew Arthur with us today from the Center for Immigration Studies. He's resident fellow in law and policy for the center. And Andrew, we were just talking about the UACs, the unaccompanied alien children. And we'll have you fine-tune this point here as far as bringing us up to speed on what we need to know and why Congress needs to act on this issue. It's a very tragic situation going on.
Sure. And so during the Biden administration, 300,000 unaccompanied alien children from non-contiguous countries, turned up at the southwest border. And they were sent to ORR, and ORR was overwhelmed. They didn't have the ability to shelter all these kids. They didn't have the ability to vet sponsors before they released these kids. And so part of the reason why we have tens of thousands of missing children, kids that the United States government can't find, is because so many corners were cut in releasing those children to sponsors. Many of them have ended up with traffickers. Many of them, you might remember a bust at a marijuana farm in California. There were unaccompanied alien children working on a marijuana farm in California. And, those are, I don't even want to go into some of the worst crimes, but a grand jury in Florida that was convened by Governor DeSantis determined that, ORR was basically complicit in some of the worst horrors that you can imagine befalling these kids. Go back to 2014 when Barack Obama had a similar surge in migrant children, and he responded to it by putting those kids on military bases and by outreach to the Central American countries most of these kids come from, to encourage their parents not to place them with smugglers, not to bring them to the United States. And when he did that, he sent Joe Biden, his vice president, to Guatemala City in June of 2014. Joe Biden, vice president at the time, said, most of these smugglers are criminals, and many of them are sexually violent criminals. Please do not trust their children with them. But, as president, he didn't do anything to stop that flow, those 300,000 plus kids who poured into the United States. So really, the biggest issue with that 2008 law, that it was premised upon the idea that every kid is better off in the United States than they are back home, and that the worst place that they can be is in government custody, that any sponsor in this country is better for that child than, being taken care of by the United States government. And so consequently, there is nothing on the back end of that system. There is no guidance for ORR or anyone else to deny a would-be sponsor of receiving one of these children. So you could have, 10 child sex offenses on your record, and ORR could hand a child over to you. So what Congress needs to do is either scrap the law and treat all of those non-contiguous kids like they do Mexicans and Canadians, which is what they should do, or alternatively, let's give more guidance to ORR. It's, Congress likes vilifying them and beating them up, and I certainly understand that because they did plenty of stuff wrong. But, let's give them some brighter line rules if we're going to keep this ridiculous system in place.
800-733-9829. Ron is calling from Tri-Cities, Washington. Ron, you're on the air. Hello, Ron.
Yeah, I was on mute. I'm sorry. This is a specific incident with Alien Gonzalez. whose mother tried to defect from Cuba with him, and she died in the process. And then Clinton ended up sending him back. What should we have done? Okay. I'm just asking your guest.
Okay.
So, yeah, what we should have done, Ron, is that child, when he was rescued at sea in a life raft. He should have been taken to the closest port, which was Miami, and the deputy port director there should have worked with the Cuban government to figure out where his father was and to get him with his father. His father, it turned out, was in Cuba, but none of what I just described happened. Instead, Janet Reno ended up having to intervene. Elian Gonzalez went with a family with some relatives of his who lived in Miami, and the day before Easter, INS agents raided that house and took him at gunpoint. None of that ever should have happened. He should have been placed back with his family. And here's the thing, Ron. When I had kids who were Elian Gonzalez's age, if my kids somehow managed to end up in Mexico or Canada or, Cuba, I would expect that government to get my child back to me because there's no better place for that child than by my side.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would disagree. I wouldn't want him back with Castro.
Well, it's interesting because if you follow what's happened to Elian Gonzalez, he's a national hero. In fact, I think he's a high-ranking Cuban government official. I am no friend of the Castro government, and you will not find a person who has worse things to say about communism than me. But, home comes first, family comes first. And I think in that, situation, he should have been back with his dad, and that is how the case ended.
Ron, thank you for your call here today. Andrew, as we talk about immigration, is our country facing an optimistic scenario right now? Are we winning the battle, or are we just spinning wheels?
Well, I'll tell you, how optimistic I am. The latest Harvard-Harris poll just came out. It was conducted about a week ago. 3/4 of the American people, American voters that were surveyed, support deporting criminal illegal aliens. 63% of them support a secure border. We've seen the alternative. We've lived through that for 4 years. You just need to drown out the Twitter, drown out the noise, and, talk to your neighbors. The American people are good-hearted people. You're not going to find a more humanitarian, generous people on the face of the earth, and our immigration policies reflect that. We want people to come here. We want them to assimilate. We want them to become Americans, just like our ancestors did. But we want them to do it the right way. Mm-hmm. We need to know who's coming into our country, who is here. And as Barbara Jordan, civil rights icon, said, immigration credibility can be defined as follows: those who should get in; those who should be kept out are kept out; and those who shouldn't be here are sent home. And that's really what we're seeing.
Well, Andrew Arthur, our guest here today on the program. And Andrew, thank you for carving out the hour. It's been a very informative time to get lots of information out and really get stories behind the stories that are so absent from so much of the legacy news media.
Absolutely, Jim. It's my pleasure and such an honor to have the opportunity to talk to your listeners. Thank you.
Andrew Arthur with us today. The website CIS.org. And friends, again, would recommend you sign up for their updates there on email service and stay abreast as to what is taking place. And by all means, be in prayer for our president, our nation, those who are heading the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies as well, ICE, and pray for their safety. Many, many threats for enforcing the laws that are on the books and protecting American citizens. So keep them in prayer. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.